The Battle of Barnet, 1471, a pivotal confrontation in the Wars of the Roses. The Battle of Barnet, fought on April 14, 1471, under cover of dense fog and political upheaval, remains one of the defining engagements of the Wars of the Roses, a dynastic civil war that ravaged England during the 15th century. More than just a battle between military forces, Barnet represented the clash of ideologies, competing claims to kingship, and the crumbling of once powerful alliances. Edward IV, a Yorkist monarch who had been deposed and exiled just the year before, returned to challenge the powerful Earl of Warwick, Richard Neville, the so-called Kingmaker, who had now aligned with the Lancastrian cause. The clash outside the town of Barnet would not only determine the fate of individual claimants but would fundamentally shape the direction of English monarchy for decades to come. Political unrest and the build-up to war. By the latter half of the 1460s, England was teetering on the brink of renewed conflict. Edward IV, who had taken the throne in 1461 by defeating the Lancastrians at Taunton, began to alienate his former allies through a series of independent decisions. Chief among those dissatisfied was Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, who had been instrumental in Edward's early successes. Warwick's expectations of political control were frustrated by Edward's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, a Lancastrian widow whose large family received an outpouring of royal favour. Furthermore, Edward bypassed Warwick's foreign policy initiatives, particularly efforts to arrange a marriage alliance with France, opting instead for an English-Burgundian alliance. These personal and political snubs led Warwick to break ranks with the Yorkist regime. After a series of failed rebellions and conspiracies, he orchestrated the stunning realignment of his loyalties by reconciling with his former enemy, Margaret of Anjou, queen to the deposed Henry VI. With her support and that of disaffected nobles like George, Duke of Clarence, Edward's own brother, Warwick launched an invasion in 1470. Edward was forced to flee England for the Low Countries while Henry VI, long imprisoned and mentally unstable, was restored to the throne in name, though real power resided in Warwick's hands. Edward IV's return and strategic maneuvering. The so-called readaptation of Henry VI proved to be short-lived. Warwick's regime lacked legitimacy, coherence, and broad support among the nobility. Sensing opportunity, Edward IV returned to England in March 1471, landing in Yorkshire with a small force of loyal followers. Initially claiming he only sought the restoration of his Duchy of York, Edward swiftly gained support as he moved southward. His popularity, charisma, and political shrewdness enabled him to rebuild his strength at a remarkable pace. By April 11, Edward had entered London unopposed. Henry VI was once more taken into Yorkist custody and imprisoned in the Tower. Edward's gaze now turned toward Warwick, who was assembling an army in the north, determined to resist the Yorkist resurgence. Barnet, a market town just north of London, was chosen as the site where the two great forces of the realm would decide England's fate. The fog of war, deployment and confusion. Warwick's army was joined by his brother, John Neville, Marquis of Montague, and the experienced Earl of Oxford. Together, they commanded roughly 15,000 men. Edward IV, commanding a slightly smaller force, was accompanied by his loyal brother Richard, Duke of Gloucester, and Lord Hastings. As Edward advanced, he reached Barnet under the cover of night on April 13, surprising Warwick's scouts and allowing him to establish his troops within striking distance. The battlefield on Easter Sunday was enveloped in thick fog, severely limiting visibility and making organized coordination nearly impossible. Edward deployed his army with Lord Hastings on the left, Edward himself commanding the centre, and Gloucester on the right. Warwick positioned Oxford on the right flank, Montague in the centre, and took charge of the left himself. Each side hoped to flank the other, but the lack of visibility meant that movements were often misinterpreted. The battle began before dawn. Oxford's men made the earliest progress, pushing back Hastings and causing disarray on the Yorkist left. However, a critical miscommunication doomed the Lancastrian cause. As Oxford's men circled back to the main Lancastrian line, they were mistaken by Montague's soldiers for Yorkist troops, likely due to the similar emblems displayed on their banners, a common issue in medieval warfare. Montague's men attacked their supposed foes, leading to chaos, panic, and accusations of treachery. Total collapse, the fall of Warwick and Montague. The breakdown in Lancastrian discipline was immediate and catastrophic. Cries of betrayal sowed distrust among Warwick's ranks. Warwick's line, which had already begun to strain under Edward's relentless advance and Gloucester's pressing assault on the flank, faltered. Edward himself led a decisive charge against the centre, inspiring his men and reinforcing his legitimacy as a warrior king. In the ensuing collapse, Warwick attempted to flee the battlefield. However, he was thrown from his horse in the confusion and cut down by pursuing Yorkist soldiers before he could escape. His brother Montague was also killed in the rout. The Earl of Oxford managed to flee the field but would remain a fugitive until re-emerging years later during the Tudor uprisings. Hundreds of Lancastrian soldiers were killed in the melee or slaughtered in the pursuit. Edward's victory was total. With Warwick, the architect of dynastic change and political machinations, dead, the Lancastrian leadership was effectively decapitated. Consequences and reassertion of Yorkist power. The victory at Barnet allowed Edward to re-establish firm control over England. He re-entered London in triumph, now with an aura of invincibility. The symbolic power of the kingmaker's death could not be overstated. For over a decade, Warwick had manipulated thrones and sovereigns. His demise marked the end of aristocratic kingmaking as a viable political strategy. Yet Edward's consolidation of power was not complete. On May 4, he would face another Lancastrian army at the Battle of Tewkesbury, where he defeated and killed the last viable Lancastrian heir, Prince Edward of Westminster. Queen Margaret of Anjou was captured. Within days, Henry VI would be found dead in the Tower, likely murdered on Edward's orders. With no rival claimants remaining, Edward's second reign was secure. The aftermath of Barnet also witnessed a reorientation of political alliances. The power of the nobility, exemplified by the overmighty subjects like Warwick, was increasingly curtailed. Edward sought to centralize authority, curb baronial independence, and restore order after years of instability. His court became a model of early Renaissance kingship, emphasizing loyalty, legal reform, and dynastic continuity. Legacy and historical interpretation. Historians continue to debate the long-term significance of the Battle of Barnet. Some view it as the culmination of a decade of escalating conflict and betrayal, while others see it as the beginning of a new phase in English governance, one marked by increased royal authority and reduced baronial autonomy. Certainly, it stands as a milestone in the evolution of English monarchy. Edward IV's actions following Barnet demonstrated a strategic brilliance that had matured over years of political struggle. No longer the youthful usurper, Edward had become a hardened ruler capable of decisive action. His reliance on a close-knit group of trusted nobles and his political pragmatism set the stage for the comparative peace of his final years. Barnet also had long echoes. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who had performed admirably at Barnet and Tewkesbury, would later become Richard III, his character and reign forever shadowed by these earlier events. The memory of Warwick, once England's most powerful subject, would serve as a cautionary tale against overmighty magnates, influencing both the Yorkist and Tudor regimes. Moreover, Barnet highlights the dangers of shifting allegiances and the fragility of political coalitions in an age where personal ambition and kinship often superseded ideology. It underscored how quickly fortunes could change in a world where loyalty was fluid and trust hard to earn. Conclusion. The Battle of Barnet was not merely a military contest but a profound moment of transformation in English history. It swept away the last great baronial challenger to the monarchy, restored Edward IV to the throne with renewed authority, and helped lay the groundwork for the eventual emergence of a more centralized English state. The fog that blanketed the battlefield was symbolic. In that obscured space, centuries-old norms of feudal loyalty and power politics were irrevocably altered. England emerged from Barnet blooded but poised for a new era, one shaped less by the ambitions of noble families and more by the strength of monarchical rule. Thanks for listening. Like, comment and make sure you subscribe to Medieval Chronicles 1066 for more adventures back to the Middle Ages. Stay curious.